Has the Multisite Mega Church run its course, or is it just getting started? Is it helping more people in the church today, or is it hurting them instead? And perhaps the biggest question of all, is the Multisite Mega Church the answer for the church in the future, or is it the beginning of the end? And no, these questions aren't just hyperbole. These are real questions that we're going to ask and answer on today's episode of the Church Disrupted podcast. We're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Multisite Mega Church, especially right here in North America. So if you're interested in finding answers to those questions and more, this is the perfect episode for you. All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Disrupted podcast with your host, Jeff Cochran. And today we're going to do something we've never done before. Today's our first two-person episode. We actually had something come up. One of our pod hosts had to bail out, but Vicki May, you're with me. And today, Vicki and I are going to continue the conversation anyway, because this is such a good conversation. We don't want to wait to have it. We're being a little selfish. But we're going to try this whole two-person pod host thing out. Let us know if you like it. Let us know if you don't. But I'm really excited about this conversation. What are we talking about today? We're asking the question, is the Multisite Mega Church a failed experiment? Is it failing, or will it end in failure? There are good things about the Multisite Mega Church. There are concerning things about the Multisite Mega Church. We're going to talk about it all. Just what is it doing, good, bad, ugly for Christianity? Going to be a fantastic conversation. You don't want to miss a moment of this one. But before we get rolling, I want to thank everybody who has been supporting us. For those of you that are liking, sharing on social media, you're subscribing to the podcast, we are so grateful for you. And we're grateful for every person who's a part of our community, from our disruptors, our catalysts, our table flippers. We could not do this without you all. And I want to give a special thanks, special shout out. We've actually got some comfortable podcast chairs and everything now, Vicki, because of the generosity of just our community. You know, we got people who are going onto the website and they're just giving gifts, man. They're giving gifts for this stuff, for our wish list, for things that we need. They're making sure that we can keep going just by giving generously on PayPal,
amazing.
On Venmo, Cash App. It's awesome.
Thank you so much, because the chairs feel nice.
They do. They feel so much better. But for every single person, from, like I said, liking on social media to those that have given online, we are so grateful for you. We can never do this without you. And I just want to say, we don't take it lightly. For every person, whether it's a gift of $5 or 60 or a few hundred, it matters, and we're so grateful. And for those of you that can't give anything financially, don't feel called to do that, but you're supporting us on social media, you're watching the pod, we're grateful for you. Let's go ahead, let's jump into the conversation today. Is the Multisite Mega Church a failed experiment? And then, of course, all those other pieces of the question, right?
It's heavy.
So the first thing we got to do, because some people aren't familiar with it, okay, let's talk about what is a megachurch, okay? Because if we don't know what a megachurch is, if we don't agree on what it is, then it's going to be a hard conversation to have. A megachurch is any church that averages 2,000 or more people in weekly attendance. So on any given week, they're going to have 2,000 or more people in worship attendance with them. That's a megachurch, okay? There are thousands of megachurches today, and megachurches are the growing segment. The churches that are growing, new churches that are starting, a lot of them are megachurches, right? Once you get out of the megachurch, I know at least for Tennessee, the average church size that's not a megachurch is 75, right?
Really?
So it's much, much smaller, and churches have traditionally been much smaller. The majority of churches, 80+%, will never break the 200 person barrier, right? And I've been to a lot of churches like 150, 200, but we're seeing more and more mega churches pop up every day. So it sounds like a good thing. We're going to wade into, is it a good thing or not? But a mega church, again, any church with 2,000 or more people in average weekly attendance. Let's talk about what's a multi-site church. If you're not familiar with that lingo, I know most of our listeners are, but if you're not, a multi-site church is simply a church with more than one campus or location. Think of a franchise model for a specific church. It's the same organization. The locations, except for one, are usually streamed video teaching, right, of the pastor at the main or broadcast location. But again, the multi-site model is you have more than one location. Think franchise model for modern churches, okay? Now, the Multisite Mega Church, which is what we're talking about here, these are mega churches of over 2,000 that are also multi-site. They have multiple locations, right? That's what they're doing. So when we talk about the multi-site mega church, that's what we're talking about. More than one location, franchise model, 2,000 plus people. The earliest mega church and multi-site church that I could find was actually a church called Highland Park Baptist Church in Chattanooga. In 1942, they were playing around with this idea. Of course, no video teaching. The sites didn't all look the same, but it actually wasn't, Vicki, until the 80s and 90s that this really started taking root.
So what do you think caused it to take root?
Well, in the 80s and 90s, you had people like Bill Hybels, you had people who were coming on the back of the Jesus Revolution, everything else, right? You started having people trying out this idea of a seeker-sensitive church, okay, where it had more modern music, it was seeker-sensitive,
That's what I was going to say.
pushing people.
Yeah, was the correlation of the new contemporary modern type Christian worship music that kind of correlated, and it just made sense.
So Willow Creek in Chicago, they were really one of the first big mega churches like this, where it was like, hey, come as you are. Mm-hmm. This is modern, music, and then it slowly started feeling like more of a concert. So people who had kind of written off church would come to this church, and you could come to churches.
Because it was different.
Well, they were for the person who is seeking, the person who didn't have a relationship with Christ, the person who wouldn't call themselves a Christian.
The unchurched, as they were called.
Yeah,
right?
You could come, you could check this out, you would enjoy it, and you get practical Christian teaching that would actually affect your life. It would positively help you, even if you didn't believe yet. Now, those mega churches, a lot of them started, tons of people came to be professing Christians, came to faith because of those churches. Okay, so the late 80s, all throughout the 90s, mega churches are growing. You're finding more and more churches that are eclipsing that 2,000 person mark. Now, in the mid 90s, the multi-site church really started being born. In the mid 90s, you had some churches like Life Church, the late 90s, Life Church, North Point in Georgia. There were these churches that were getting so big that one location was maxed out. It wasn't feasible to continue building or
adding on multiple
services. There were no more rooms for services, right? So when you're running 12 services on a Sunday, there's no more room. Mm-hmm. So they started experimenting. A few churches started experimenting with video teaching in its infancy, with with the internet, with recordings. A lot of different ways it was done. It's been done a lot of different ways over time. But this is super interesting to me, right? This is how fast the landscape of the American church has changed, okay? In 1999, how many multi-site churches do you think there were in the entire United States? Multi-site mega churches.
In 1999. I'm going to say 10.
Bingo. Right on.
There were 10.
There were literally 10.
Okay.
10 multi-site mega churches in the U.S. in 1999. 10 in the entire country that had more than one site, this kind of franchise model. By 2014, which is the last year I can find good numbers on, I know it's bigger and it's grown since then. I know it's grown tremendously. I just can't find numbers. By 2014, there were over 8,000 multi-site mega churches.
Wow.
8,000 multi-site mega churches that are averaging over 2,000 in attendance, usually at their broadcast campus, and then they're starting other campuses, other locations as they go. So whether you like it or whether you hate it, the multi-site mega church has been on an unprecedented growth, right? From 1999 to 2014, and especially before COVID, even after COVID, this has kind of been the strategy for a lot of churches to grow in their community. We're doing really well. Let's go to other communities, other part of our communities. That was originally what it was. Let's just go to 5 miles down the street, 10 miles down the street to a neighboring county, neighboring city, something like that.
Right.
Now you have churches like Life Church that are nationwide.
Right.
They're in 20 plus states, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know how many states Life Church is in, but I know they're in a lot. So not only have they grown, the multi-site megachurch model has been changing like crazy. And a lot of us, again, people who are watching, listening, those of us that are hosting, a lot of us have either been a part of working or attending a multi-site megachurch, or we at least know someone who is, right? Maybe you still attend a multi-site megachurch today. There are a lot of good ones out there, okay? This podcast is not a blanket, we hate the multi-site megachurch. Not that at all. But I think it's pretty alarming that in 15 years, We went from 10 multi-site mega churches to over 8,000. And I would say the number's probably somewhere between 10 and 15,000 a day would be my guess. There's no real good place. Nobody's done a recent study for us to have those numbers. Lifeway research. Lifeway does a lot of research for especially kind of evangelical churches, right? Lifeway research actually put this out. The multi-site model has been adopted by 70% or more of mega churches. So out of the churches that are over 2,000, 70% or more have adopted this multi-site, multi-campus franchise model where we're getting smaller buildings and maxing them out in services and then doing other buildings, right? Some of them are doing it because they're too big. It's the only way they can grow. Others are doing it as a way to grow, right? Which I think are two different approaches.
Yes.
But that's where we're at today with the multi-site megachurch. So when you think about the multi-site megachurch, Vicki, what are some of the kind of words or thoughts that come to mind, if I can speak?
Well, does it matter if it's positive or negative?
No,
because you could go in any direction.
Yeah, words and phrases.
I think positively, words and phrases, bigger can reach more, include more people, but it also can lose a lot of people.
Yeah.
Disconnection. There could be disconnection, like true relationships. Are they existing?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of volunteers. There's lots of volunteers needed.
Yeah.
How's that all working?
Well, you have to have hundreds, if not thousands of
who's
volunteers.
caring for who's caring.
Yeah.
What person is caring for this person this group of this entity, there's a lot of things that come to mind.
So there's no way to run a growing multi-site megachurch at a certain point without having hundreds, if not thousands of volunteers.
Absolutely.
So the question you're really asking is, hey, are they being cared for?
How they're being cared for.
Are they not? Yeah.
Or are they not? Or
it's a good question.
Yeah.
I want to take just a few minutes out of the podcast episode to thank our podcast partners who help make this possible every single week. Rob Scott with the Forgiveness Link and Dustin Stitt with the East Tennessee Mentorship Association. They care deeply about you. They care about helping people transform their lives and find healing. And they get church hurt and spiritual abuse. I say that what Rob and his team at the Forgiveness Link do, I always say it's like mental health magic, because in as little as 8 sessions, and you heard me right, I'm not making that up, in as little as 8 sessions, they can transform your life. They'll help you leave those triggers behind. They'll help you find healing. They'll help you take back control of your own life. And I know that because I've experienced it. They offer free consultations to Church Disrupted listeners. And if you like what you hear, move forward. They're going to give you a free session out of those 8 as well. If you don't like what you hear, there are no strings attached. We only want you to be able to do what is going to help you heal. But a lot of our listeners say, you know what, Jeff, I don't really trust therapy. I'm not sure about all this mental health stuff. That stuff feels kind of soft to me. Well, if that's you, you can work with Dustin Stitt and the team at the East Tennessee Mentorship Association. They're going to walk with you at your own pace, but there's nothing soft about what they do. They're going to help you tackle these kind of issues. They're going to help you step into the best version of you and overcome those things that are holding you back. They get church hurt, they get spiritual abuse, but this is a veteran-owned business. These are guys who are going to get you. And again, they're not going to push you farther than you're ready, but they're not going to let you stay where you are. They're not going to let you stay stuck. I believe in both of these organizations. And here's what I would say. If you aren't in therapy, if you haven't taken a step to really take ownership and take back control of your own mental health, let me encourage you, reach out to Rob and the team at the Forgiveness Link or Dustin and the team at East Tennessee Mentorship Association. Just schedule a free call. Just listen to what they have to say. If you don't like it, man, you're not committed to anything, but you owe it to yourself to see if just maybe they can actually be the people to help you. And this can be the step that you can take to step into the best part of your life, to take back full control of your mental health and your experiences. So, hey, I trust them completely, and I think you're going to love them when you talk to them too. You can find out more information about both businesses, about both organizations at disrupted.church on our partnership tab, or you can check out the links directly in the description on today's podcast episode. But Forgiveness Link and East Tennessee Mentorship Association, thank you so much for supporting our listeners and supporting the Church Disrupted podcast. Some of the words and phrases, just thoughts, pictures that come to my mind. I'm thinking electric worship.
Oh, sure. Okay.
The lights. I'm thinking about the fog, the haze, whatever. It feels like a concert.
Almost
feels
entertainment.
fantastic.
Almost entertainment in a way.
Yeah, but I'm not going to lie. Worship feels fantastic.
Sure, it's great. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Especially if it's done well. And you got some pipes on you. People don't know. If you've never heard Vicki sing, she is amazing.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And I love to worship. I love to lead worship. I love that because it feeds, that is a really wonderful thing when there is a big crowd like a mega church. If there's a big crowd of people and the Spirit's moving and you feel it like this wave in the room, it's fantastic. That's a great thing.
Exactly. And I think one of the other things I think about is energy, and we'll get into this later, but I'll mention this. There's an incredible energy when you feel like you're a part of something so much bigger than you in a multi-site mega church. The one question I would ask though is sometimes people talk about the Spirit moving, and I'm wondering, are you feeling the Spirit or are you feeling
energy? Yeah, right? Well, that's valid.
Are you feeling the Spirit, or did they turn the air conditioning down by a couple of degrees?
That's a legit way. I mean, throw that out there question. Yeah.
And it's not one or the other, right? But I think sometimes it can be, the energy is fantastic.
The energy is fantastic.
It can be really easy to confuse that energy with the Holy Spirit moving. I'm thinking about charismatic pastors. I'm thinking about celebrity pastors. I'm thinking about really good teaching. If you want to find good teaching, go to a multi-site mega church, because they're not going to grow that big without a really good teacher, someone who's entertaining. So when I say good teacher, some of our multi-site mega church pastors, they are phenomenal at handling the word. They're great theologians. Others, half the stuff that comes out of their mouth really concerns me, right? But that's going to be with any church.
Sure.
What you are going to get with a multi-site mega church is you're generally going to be entertained. It's not going to be boring when you come into the teaching.
True, but there's also the sense that are they the ones that actually, is it their words or is it someone else's? Are they the ones that
write their own sermons?
Right.
Well,
because if you become so big, I mean, that's probably a whole nother podcast topic. But
it is, and we can talk about it. So let's put a pin in it and let's come back to it, because we're just talking about it right now. But I will say before we get back to it, all of these multi-site mega churches are going to have good preaching and a good speaker.
Sure.
There are quite a few that don't write their own sermons, but what they do is they're good at delivering.
They're good at delivery.
And look,
that's the point.
For some people that'll bother you, others it won't. That's kind of up to you. So we'll talk about it more in a minute. But I'm thinking about, again, is that celebrity pastor or that charismatic pastor, very gifted, great teacher. It's going to be exciting. The message, it's going to be practical. Like you're going to have stuff to take home. So we're not talking about the tabernacle. We're not talking about the feast all day. We're not talking about a bunch of heavy theological stuff that may lose people. It's going to be exciting and it's going to be practical, right? You got the energy in the room we've already talked about. The energy usually starts in the parking lot. Like when you pull up to a multi-site mega church, you feel like you're a part of something special.
That was the other thing I was going to talk about, because you were thinking about buzzwords, and I was kind of all over the place when you first asked, but it's like I also see aesthetically pleasing things. So I'm a visual art teacher, and so I am drawn to color and graphics and logos, and those are all there. A mega church, a multi-site mega church is definitely going to have all of those.
It's going to be
things.
Sharp.
Yes,
it's going to be sharp. It's going to
clean, crisp, eye-catching, bold. It's got a nice graphic that's memorable. Easy to see, easy to define.
Some multi-site mega churches do kind of their graphics and the aesthetics and just the feel of the location of the environment. It actually feels and looks better than huge businesses.
Agreed. And
it's really, really good at it.
And it's very, it starts in the parking lot with banners.
Everything's on brand.
Everybody's on brand. Vests that the parking attendants are, vols are working, and
signs that are welcoming you, smiling faces. It's awesome.
When you go to the coffee bar and whatever, it's in the bathroom.
The free
with
gift
the
you're getting is branded with a shirt that you have to decide whether you want to be a walking billboard or not. But the shirt looks cool, or the coffee
advertisement.
Mug. But no, so it looks good. And I'll tell you this, and I think Sean and I actually talked about it on a previous episode for a minute, but a lot of multi-site mega churches now, kind of one of the things they're doing is they're even getting a smell, right? And the smell is, it doesn't matter what location you walk into, it looks good, it feels good, it smells good. Now, here are some of the negative things I'm thinking about, though. I'm thinking anonymous, which can be good or bad.
Right.
There are seasons in my life where I wanted to be anonymous in church.
Right. You want to step in the door and you want to be able to experience without, any kind of preconceived.
I don't want to talk to 80 people.
I don't want to talk to 1,000 people.
Yeah.
I just need to come and get some feeding into my soul. Yeah.
But the downside of anonymous is it's sometimes hard to actually ever become anything but anonymous.
Right. It's hard to connect.
Because you're in a sea of people.
Right. That's right.
Difficult connection. I'm thinking lack of discipleship.
Yes.
Because the more people you have, the quicker you're putting people into leadership roles. Like,
absolutely.
The bigger you are, the more small group leaders you're looking for. And the small group leaders may not have been discipled enough yet to disciple someone else, right?
Correct.
I think lack of pastoral care. And again, this isn't for all of them, but it is really hard to get good pastoral care in a multi-site mega church because they're running really lean on staff members. If you have one staff member for every 500 to 1,000 people, you can't care for them without volunteers. And I don't care how good a volunteer is. I don't care how much they love Jesus. The average layperson, they're not trauma informed. They don't have any sort of counseling training. They don't know how to do pastoral care, especially if it's coming to like hospital visits or somebody may be dying, like all of those sort of things. Someone's going through a heavy divorce. Well, you can give them advice because maybe you went through a divorce, but do you know how to actually walk them through the ups and downs of that? Not being black and white of what does just the Bible say about divorce, but being able to walk them through those emotions without training, that can be really difficult.
Right. No. I mean, you're putting a big burden on the people you're asking to take on those roles. And when you become a member of the church and you're like, there's big stress to get involved because they need you involved immediately because they're counting on you because like you said, a staff, there's only so many staff. And so you're like, oh, well, I'm supposed to do this. I need to do this. I'm not going to be a part of this church if I don't do this. I'm supposed to sign up for all these things and I've got to find my place. And there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But where did the training and care structure happen instead of just being thrown in?
A lot of times they need you so much that you're in quick. So the good news is you feel wanted. You feel valued. Sure,
that's
you feel
a great
needed.
Thing. You're like, oh, I can make a difference. I can be included in here. Sure.
Yeah. And all of us want to feel needed. So that's fantastic. But if you get in and you're not trained, you're excited to jump in. And it's normally a while before you realize I don't have all the resources that I need. So one, it can feel really bad when you're in a situation where you don't feel like you're equipped. And two, we talked about this on the podcast a lot. A lot of volunteers are burning out because they're giving way more than they ever needed to give. These are people with families and full-time jobs and all those things, right?
Correct.
And I know every time we talk about this, I'm going to have somebody on social media who's like, well, if you're not willing to give up everything to follow Jesus, you're not willing to, to follow him. You're not really invested with Jesus, right? You're not worthy to follow him. So that's just the issue. Or these people aren't equally yoked, or everybody isn't willing to give everything to Jesus. Guys, it doesn't matter how bought in you are to Jesus. Jesus's plan was not for you to spend 40 to 80 hours at your church. His plan was for you to spend time outside the church with people who don't know him, with people who are hurting, right? So at some point, there's a problem. There is too much. It doesn't matter how much good you're doing. There's too much. At some point, you're volunteering too much, I guess. Not saying that really well. And I know there are people, you're listening, that you get mad every time we talk about it because you love volunteering at your church. I love that you love volunteering at your church, but you need to be outside of those walls more than you're inside of those walls. And wherever you draw the line, there is such a thing as volunteering too much. Okay, so don't comment at us and tell us that there's not such a thing as serving too much, and people who get upset or feel like they're burnout just don't love Jesus enough. That's ridiculous.
Well, it is ridiculous, and I mean I can speak from experience. I loved serving, but I got to a point where it was like when I finally started backing away from some of those roles, I was like, oh my gosh, I have time to do these other things that I haven't had time to do, or I can actually relax at home with my husband and spend time with my family.
Or you can actually go to the gym and take care of your health.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, take care of myself instead of just being busy.
So there have been a lot of times in my history with the church, there have been a whole lot of times where my only friends were people who attended that church. And Candace and I used to say it. We used to think it was funny, but it was basically, if you don't volunteer in our ministry and go to our church, we can't be friends with you.
We can't be friends.
And we weren't trying to be jerks, but Candace would tell people all the time, she would just say, we don't have time.
We don't have time. We won't see you unless you want to volunteer with us.
Now I look back on that and I think about leaving churches for other churches and then just stopping talking to those friends that mattered so much to me because we weren't in close proximity. I think that's dangerous. I think there's a danger there. But no, so I think a lot of the negatives, I'm thinking about people. I'm also thinking with the negative, there's the good to the polish and the branding we were talking about earlier. But sometimes it's so polished that it's easier to feel like things are being faked or that things are being scripted, that it's more of a performance, right?
Sure.
Which can bother people sometimes. So a lot of the negatives are actually other sides of the good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the tension that we have to hold.
Yep.
So when we're thinking about the Multisite Mega Church, this is huge, fast growing segment. There's, one in every city, just about. There's probably multiples in every city. In July of 2023, NPR released an article, and here was the title though. And I think this is something we have to talk about. It's concerning either way. The title was this: Mega churches are getting even bigger as churches close across the country. And they talked about smaller churches in that 75, 200, 500 range. They're closing. Your normal sized churches are closing at an alarming rate. Okay. Mega churches and multi-site churches are growing. And part of what they talked about though, a lot of these churches are closing because when they're struggling and they're struggling financially, multi-site mega churches will come along and say, hey, we'll buy your building. We'll take care of that financial struggle. We'll have a merger because we need your building and you need people. But what's happening though is with every given week, every given month, there are less and less what we would call normal life-giving church communities. So there are less options with every passing week for people who don't feel like the multi-site mega church is right for them. And what I wonder, I have this question: what's going to happen when most churches are mega churches or multi-site churches, right? What's going to happen when there's no smaller normal sized church to go to, or if there was no smaller or normal sized church to go to find refuge in? Could the multi-site mega church by itself actually support and sustain all these people? And I don't know if it can, because I know a whole lot of people who left very traumatized or hurt from their experience in the multi-site mega church, and they found healing at a small church, a 200 member or less church.
But if there's less of those, then what's going to happen when the people keep leaving? It's kind of a scary thought to think about. I mean, are people going to give up church altogether?
Yeah.
Or are they going to, like, I think you brought this up earlier, leave the Christian faith, which was definitely devastating.
Yeah. Well, if you've been through significant religious trauma, and because you and I both experienced this, if all you've known is the mega church, you loved it, but then you go through a traumatic experience or you're spiritually abused, you leave and your only options are other mega churches, even if they're not as big or the same. There's so many triggers that make it hard. All of a sudden, things you loved that make it hard to worship. It is hard to worship in a mega church after you've left one.
I have, and I've tried to visit other churches so far, and I do enjoy visiting, but then at the same time, I am triggered, and it is hard. It's like I don't want any part of this right now. I need a break. And so
you just get so distracted by the things that are going on.
Because you're like, oh, that makes me think of so-and-so. Or
you're
that makes me
feeling
think
those things all over again.
Yeah.
You can't think about Jesus. You can't really worship.
I'm majorly distracted. Yeah, absolutely. And that is a problem. And so being at home and because thankfully I may have given up on people in the church, but I've not given up on God.
Yeah.
But
and you've not given up on the church and the people. You've given up on
the
certain
church
people.
is still, but because the church is not a building, it's supposed to be us people, right? We don't have to be in a certain smelling, looking, presented.
You don't even have to have a
glittery,
building.
Lots of light entertainment building for it to be called a church, or same regard, a little small church with a steeple on the little corner near your neighborhood. Yeah. It is a church, but it's also a building.
Yeah.
So, I'm just thankful that I'm still in a place where of course I'm not giving up on God, but some people will.
Yeah.
If they've been hurt and traumatized. And this has been their only experience. They came to church because it seemed like something they were willing to try, which is great.
It was fun. It was high energy. Right. They were needed. The show was fantastic.
This is different. And that's a great thing. Let's bring in people because, this has given them a new experience. But do you keep them?
Yeah.
And so if you do lose them, and that's been their only experience.
Where do they go?
Where'd they go?
What do they do? Right? Do they even know what to look for in a church, right? Can they find a place where...
If they were so disconnected, who could they turn to?
Yeah. So, and I think about this, One of the best things about the Multisite Mega Church is there's a lot of times it's a great show that draws people in. The lights, the haze. The old saying, "More haze, more praise." Right? I don't really know that the haze affects the praise.
Hate that fog machine.
So you got the lights, you got the praise. It is a great show, but I can't tell you. I've been at multiple churches where it's like, "Hey, we got the best show in town," or that church is growing because they got the best show in town. Now, that's going to make some of you cringe. Others of you are fine. But wherever you land, there's nothing wrong with the church having a good presentation if it's authentic.
Sure.
Show makes it feel like it's not authentic. I'm not putting those words in people's mouths. That's what I've heard time and time again. But if you have the best show in town, but people get hurt at the place with the best show in town, when you no longer feel comfortable at the big show, where do you go? Especially if you've not ever been in another church, because being a part of a smaller church and being known in community it's just different, right? And again, this isn't my question. I didn't ask this question. This question was asked by a recent NPR article, right? That they're asking these questions, okay? Is it a good thing that mega churches are getting bigger and bigger and bigger while other churches close across the country? On one hand, a lot of churches are, growing and people are coming in. On the other hand, churches are closing down. Here's where I think we start finding a little bit of an answer. And we're not going for answers today. We're just trying to have this conversation because I think it's important.
I definitely don't have all the answers.
All of the statistics. So if you look at like the stuff that's coming out of Barna Group, you look at the stuff that's coming out of Lifeway Research, right? You look at all of it. Gallup, all of the statistics tell us that the religious landscape in America, that people are leaving Christianity more and more with every given year. Christianity is leaking. Okay? It is leaking. It's not growing. It's leaking overall. Okay? And for a long time, Christianity was growing year over year over year, and then it was holding steady, right? It's not holding steady, especially as we look at like Gen Z, your younger millennials, Gen Alpha that's coming after Gen Z. More and more people with every year are leaving the faith, not the church. They're leaving the faith. And I wonder, is that tied to, as the mega churches are growing, right, and other churches are closing, is that part of the reason why people are leaving the faith? Because I also know this, from being a pastor at a multi-site mega church, a ton of the growth that's experienced, not all of it. There's a whole lot of people who are saved, who are seekers, who have, they don't have a relationship with God. They don't have faith at all when they come in. But I would say a massive amount of the growth is actually transfer growth. It comes from people come from other churches that didn't have the show or didn't have all the programs or didn't have all the things, right? Mm-hmm. So you're growing, but just because you're growing doesn't mean you're healthy. And just because you're growing doesn't mean things are good. But a lot of people are leaving these smaller churches, I believe, from my experience. And again, this is just my experience. You don't have to agree with it. But first of all, unless you pastored in a multi-site mega church, it's going to be hard for you to really talk about this the same way, right? You can have an opinion, but it's going to be hard for us to talk about that the same way. From my experience, I've seen a lot of transfer growth. I've seen a lot of new people who come in but don't stay. So what I'm wondering is how many people are leaving, because I've heard this time and time and time again. How many people are leaving the smaller church down the street because of all the resources the bigger church has to offer, right? And these smaller churches are closing down. They're selling buildings to the mega church, not because their people left the faith, but because their people went to the mega church down the street, right? So are these churches dying because no one wants to come to them, or are they literally being cannibalized by the multi-site mega church? And even though the multi-site mega church is growing across the country, how much of that growth is transfer growth from other Christians versus how much of it is really growth from new Christians? Because here's the question we got to ask, okay? If it's a lot of growth, Vicki, from brand new people who weren't Christ followers and now they are, and multi-site mega churches are the ones growing across the country, right? All the other churches are declining. If that's the case and a whole lot of people are coming to faith, then why is Christianity leaking? Why are more people leaving the faith? Are some of those new people who are coming in actually, are they like the parable of the sower and the seeds? Are they withering and leaving the faith before they really engage? Are there people who were engaged in the church who were just walking away? Something's happening because all of these churches can't be growing and people be leaving the faith. And I know as many people leaving the faith from multi-site mega churches as I do from small churches. Actually, and again, part of this is just because of my background. So I'm not saying this is everybody, but I know of significantly more people who are leaving the faith or they're not leaving the faith, but they're struggling to go back to church, who have left a Multisite Mega Church than I do just kind of your average 100 to 200 member church, right? So again, it just makes me wonder if some of these growth metrics that we think make us look healthy, I wonder if some of them are false positives that one day we're going to realize that they actually made us feel more secure about the faith landscape in America than we should have been.
Well, I'm wondering, are these mega churches, multi-site churches, they track a lot of things.
Yeah.
But are they paying attention to the people that are leaving? And
sure.
and if they are they being true and asking, being bold and asking, well, why are you leaving? Why did you leave? Did you leave because of offense? Did you leave because you weren't connecting? Yep. What is the reason that you're leaving? Yep. And so, because we, if not, they should be, because that is a huge concern. If you're going to take on the big church model, then you need to make sure you can sustain that. Yeah. And that means...
Well, not that you can sustain that you can support those people.
That's what I was saying, is you sustain that. In that, you have to care for the people that are coming in your door, not just because they're coming in your door and they're giving you money and they're volunteering in your volunteer roles. Are you caring for those people? Because obviously they're coming, but they're also leaving.
Yeah, something's happening.
Something's going on. Something.
Yeah, and the majority of the people, the majority of Christians right now are in multi-site mega churches. So we have to ask that question. You can look like your church is growing. You can look like everything is up and to the right. It can feel good. And in reality, people be hemorrhaging out the back door. But we're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. I want to put a pin in that because I want to talk about some other stuff before we get there. But again, I thought that was a really valid question.
It is.
And it's a question that honestly, I found out was being asked by people who are outside the church first, right? But let's think about this. So we're talking about how many multi-site mega churches there are in the country. There are thousands. I want to give you an idea of the scale though, right? Because you may be a part of a multi-site mega church, and that means you're at a church of 2,500, okay, with 2 locations. You may be at a church that's got, 20,000, and 20 locations, right? I want to give you the outreach.com top 100 largest churches in 2022. They haven't done the 2023 yet, as far as I know. So this is the last survey that they did. When you look at that top 100 list of the largest churches in America, the top 16, okay, the top 16 are all averaging over 20,000 people a week.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of people.
And if you look at it as, hey, that's a lot of people following Jesus and growing and coming to Christ, that's a great number. That's awesome, man. Fantastic. Let's celebrate. If you're looking at it and you're saying, how in the world do you care for and disciple 20,000 people in one organization?
And that's scary.
It's a little more scary, right? But either way, regardless of where you land on this, the fact that the top 16 are all over 20,000 it's huge. It's massive. The first 62 on the list are all over 10,000. So we're talking massive, massive churches. And a lot of multi-site mega churches aren't this big, but they aspire to be that big. And they're learning from the churches that are on the top 62 of this list. They're learning from the churches on the top 16, 15, 10 on this list. So let's just talk about them real quick, because there are a lot of us that don't realize how big these churches are and how many of these big churches there are. So Dream City Church in Arizona, they come in at 16, 20,000. Bayside Church in California, 20,000 people each week. Gateway Church in Texas, 20,500. Mount Zion Baptist Church in Nashville, Tennessee, 21,000. Let's just stop right there. We're 4 in. This bothers me. The amount of churches on the top 100 list that give round, even numbers. Think about the first few. I'm not attacking any of these churches, but you just notice this. 20,000, 20,000, 20,500, 21,000. Are you legitimately telling me
you're rounding up?
4 churches in a row have even nice, neat numbers? Okay, well, that's part of the problem, because numbers matter so much in these churches and wanting to get on lists and everything else. And the way we count, again, there's nothing wrong with counting. There's nothing wrong with having a big church, but there's a moniker that's known amongst like church staff and church volunteers. There's a phrase that we use called pastor math. And pastor math is a fancy phrase. Vicki, have you heard about pastor math?
I have not.
Okay. So we used to talk about pastor math all the time. You'd get numbers and you'd go, there's no way that can be true. And a group of people, like I said, volunteers and pastors would just start laughing. They go, well, that's pastor math, right? I once worked for a pastor that whatever number he said on stage, the rest of the staff was like, that's not even close. We think he did it on accident. We're not sure. But pastor math is we're counting the room, right? We're counting the room. And let's just think about a small church. Your ushers are counting and they count, 172 people.
So
right?
they're going to round to 180?
172 people. And then the pastor is like, well, there are like 17 people that I think you didn't see. And then this excuse, that excuse. And before you know it, it's at least 200. We're at 200. There's a big difference in 200 people and 172 people, right? Yeah. So like I was sharing podcast numbers with you guys a little bit ago, and I shared them on the Discord with part of our community and the podcast host. Did you notice that when I shared, like I was talking about like, hundreds of thousands, I shared it down to the number. It was an odd number. It was weird. Well, that's how you count, right? That was just counting them up.
It's the math I learned in school.
It feels like there's a lot of rounding going on. Yeah. Maybe they don't have a problem with the rounding. It feels like there's a lot of pastor math going on when the first few, and you're going to see the majority on this list are round, even, nice numbers. Okay. All I'm saying, Vicki, it makes me wonder if I can trust it. I'll tell you this is crazy. I don't know if this is a good story or bad story, but I think it's funny. I was talking to a pastor friend. It was probably about a year and a half ago. We were leaving an event. Somebody gave a number, and then somebody else said, I don't think that was right. And we all just started laughing. And he said, you know how it goes. And I yelled at my pastor friend. I said, hey, man, that's pastor math. And he goes, yeah, it is pastor math. But come on, man, there's nothing wrong with pastor math. It just is how it is. And I stopped in the middle of this group of people, made everybody feel uncomfortable because I said, well, actually, pastor math is a fancy way for just saying we lied.
We lied.
We don't want to say we lied. Everybody stopped. Nobody knew whether they should laugh or not because it was funny. But at the same time, it's like, dang. We are lying, right?
And we're pastors, and we shouldn't be lying.
Yeah. So we eventually started laughing about it again, though. And I said, here's the deal, though. I said, pastors shouldn't be the ones that are always lying about the numbers. That feels wrong, right? But it's true.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
I can I remember when I used to attend a small church in my hometown many years ago, and they had the little board in the back above where you could see
exactly how many people attended.
And you could see exactly how many attended last Sunday and how many were attending that Sunday.
Yeah. And it was usually like 2 to 3 digits.
101 or 93.
It was never even.
Or 52. Right.
How many times do you remember it being even, right?
Never.
So again, this isn't a huge deal, but I think it's something to say, hey, it should be bothersome how many churches on this top 100 list gave even numbers, because what it tells me is one of two things, okay? And again, there are going to be some people who say, hey, you're focusing on the wrong thing. But when you have in this 100 largest churches list, the amount of them that gave even numbers, it tells me that either they're lying or rounding on their numbers, or they're just being lazy about their numbers. Both of those, I think, have a negative connotation for churches. I think as churches, we could be better. But let's keep going. All right. So we got through the first four. The last one, Mount Zion Baptist Church at 21,000. Central Christian in Nevada, 21,055. That's the least round number. All right. So I feel better about that. Fellowship Church in Texas. I love this. 24,162. I think that's way too big, but it's a real number.
It's a real number.
It's a real number. Okay. North Point Ministries in Georgia, 24,273. Again, we got a couple of real numbers and I love it. But then we come to Christ Fellowship in Florida, 25,000. 25,000 is a massive number. And two, how are you telling me you got 25,000? You're averaging 25,000 on the dot every week, no more, no less. It still bothers me, right? Southeast Christian in Kentucky, 25,917. Okay. Elevation Church, 26,000. Big numbers. About half of them are more rounded numbers. Saddleback, 28,000. Christ Church of the Valley, another good number. This is a real number, 30,482. Okay. Pastors who are watching, if you just want to trick us and you want to like pastor math and lie, just give a number that's not even and we'll at least think it's probably true.
Believe
it's better than everybody else. Okay. Better than half the people already. Christ Church of the Valley, though, 30,482 every week. Crossroads Church in Ohio, 35,253 every week. These numbers are getting massive. Listen to these last three, okay? And there are always churches that are huge that don't get on the list on certain years because they just don't send in their paperwork, so I'm sure there's some we're missing. Lakewood Church in Texas, Joel Osteen's church, 45,000 people a week. Again, awesome if people are coming to Jesus. How can you care for 40,000 people?
To get mind-boggling, yes.
45,000 people a week. How are you discipling 45,000 people a week?
How are you caring for that?
Can I give you another way to think about this that's even more crazy? Okay, because this is how we thought about it. In the Multisite Mega Church, the last staff I was on, this is how we were taught to think about it, okay? And it's good thinking, but it's going to open your mind even more. If there are 45,000 people coming every week, and we know that the average person comes to church once a month, roughly, then actually the amount of people that call Lakewood home is probably about 180,000.
Wow.
Because again, the average person's going to church 1 or 2 times a month. It's actually, I think, like 1.5 or something like that, okay? So if that's the case, as big as these numbers are, it's actually way more people who are connected to this church and calling it home. Because I can tell you from talking to pastors, from looking at the numbers, from church consulting all over the country, okay, what you're averaging weekly, and that's what this is, what you're averaging weekly is a small percentage of the people you actually have in church.
And now
because people are busy. They're so busy today.
Are they counting online as well? Like online?
Some of them count online. Some of them don't. Some churches count online just as how many viewers we had. Most churches are going to count 3-second views. So if they were on for 3 seconds, then they attended church that day. 3 seconds is a little rough to attend church, right? I would like to see, how many people were actually there for 10 minutes, right?
10 minutes, 30 minutes.
This is going to bother some people. Other people it won't bother. But just peeking behind the curtain for a minute, the majority of mega churches use what's called a multiplier when you're looking at online numbers. So again, there's a reason for this, but they're saying most people who are watching on a Sunday that they don't believe that that's one person is probably like a family or at least a couple. So they'll do a multiplier of 2 or 2.5. That's kind of the most average, 2 or 2.5. Minimum's usually 1.5. But even with that, a lot of these churches still don't count online numbers, or they're not huge. But even if you take out the online numbers, if you're thinking about these weekly numbers and then the amount of people who are coming in, once or twice a month, the numbers are still even bigger than what we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
Lakewood's at 45,000. Here are the top 2 on the list. You may know them, you may not. Coming in at number 2, Church of the Highlands out of Birmingham, Alabama, campuses all over Alabama, 60,000 people a week.
Wow.
Okay. 1, again, it's massive. I've got a lot of questions about it. 2, I don't buy for 1 minute that it's 60,000. What's the actual number? Are we rounding up? Are we rounding down? Are we guessing? Right? But what they're telling us is 60,000. So again, if the average person's coming twice a month, that's 120,000. And twice a month is higher than most churches that I've been at, that I've consulted with, that I've worked at. And then the number 1 church on that list, okay? And I don't know, I may have told you this already, so if I did, let me know if you remember it. But if you don't remember it, I'd love for you to guess, Vicki. How many people do you think attend weekly at the largest church in America, Life Church in Oklahoma?
I don't think you did tell me. Life Church, let's see.
Remember, Church of the Highlands was 60,000.
60,000, so it has to be more than that.
Yep.
85.
Okay, I had to have told you, because
No.
you're not guessing both of them in
Really?
one day.
No, seriously.
That's right on.
I told you that
That's right
my
on.
brain is not good with numbers.
But you guessed 10 earlier. Okay.
I know. I'm a good guesser today.
All right, so maybe I told you for real.
Maybe
I don't
you
know.
did.
I don't know.
Maybe I
But
remember.
you're spot on. 85,000 people. And again, that's
85,000.
across multiple states. Started in Oklahoma. Most of their campuses are in Oklahoma. But
I didn't think there were that many people.
I like Life Church. I like Craig Groeschel. I love that. Man, they're the ones that started the Bible app. They give away so much for free.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
There is so much good from this church, so much good ministry they do. Pretty much if you watch a church online at this point, it's because Life Church has given away their free online platform. Okay?
Oh, that's
Now,
fantastic.
It's awesome. So I'm not bagging on Life Church just because they're big. What I am saying, though, they're the biggest church in America at this point at 85,000 people a week. which again, if we play that out between every church members attending on average every, one time a month or two times a month, you play that out. I'm really bad at math, but that's like anywhere between 170 and like 320, 300 or 30,000 people that they're reaching. Okay. A lot of people are going online. If you're going online, you don't go every week. You have totally different people going online. I think these numbers, the people who are connected to these churches, I think these numbers would blow our absolute minds if we actually could see you just count once, whether you come 4 times or you come 1 time a month. If we could see the actual people connected to these churches that call them their churches, I honestly think it would be scary a little
There's
bit.
a lot
how
more.
big they are.
And a big chunk of those are going to be volunteers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they're going to be attending even more than twice a month, usually every Sunday.
Yeah, but if the average is a person's attending once a week and you're counting those volunteers that are there more often than that, then or once a month, what it may actually mean is that some people are calling it church, but they're coming less than once a month, right?
True.
Regardless, though, these numbers, as massive as they already are, the truth is they're actually probably a lot bigger, even with the pastor math and stuff, because we're talking about pastor math, rounding up all the things. The reason why they're bigger is because that's a weekly number.
Right.
An
average.
Yeah, but I want you to think about this.
Right.
I want you to think about this. 62, that's the top 16. But the top 62, like we said, are all over 10,000. All over 10,000 people. You talk about locations, just the top 2, Life Church, by my count, has 45 locations on their website right now. Okay, now I'm not great at math. I might have missed 1 or 2. I might have counted 1 or 2 twice, but I counted 45 locations. Church of the Highlands, 23. 23, okay? So you got all these locations, you got all of these people. What that's telling me too, though, is I know like at some of these broadcast campuses, like at Life Church, you may have at a broadcast campus 10, 15,000 people going at that initial campus, right? The campuses that are close to it may have a lot. If you do the math, 85,000 divided by 45, you end up with most of these campuses are averaging under 2,000 people a week, okay? They're almost mega churches on their own, but there's a significant discrepancy between the broadcast campus, right, and these other churches. And when you add those big campuses in, what that tells me is a lot of these campuses, they're not huge. They're small. That could be a good thing because maybe people are getting discipled better.
Right.
But it also tells me that it feels like there's a law of diminishing returns, that the more campuses we have, yes, we're reaching more people, but the more campuses we have, the smaller those campuses seem to be getting, which makes me wonder, is it really the best move to be planting new campuses, or would it be the best move at some point to say, hey, diminishing returns, we're going to train pastors and we're going to plant new churches?
Right.
Autonomous churches that don't have video teaching, that aren't just doing everything the same way. Because I'll tell you, working in the Multisite Mega Church, most of the time it didn't matter, especially like when we were doing student ministry and stuff. It didn't matter that our communities were different and that the people that were coming were different. We did everything the same way.
The same. It is a cookie cutter clunk, place here, do this, do that, do it.
Which is great if you're Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, because I want it to be the same everywhere I go. I'm not sure it works for discipleship when people and communities are so different.
Correct. I'm wondering about that too. Because I have volunteered at multi-sites, and each campus is different.
Yeah.
Now, it looks the same, mostly sounds the same, but the people are not necessarily the same.
The preaching's the same.
But the preaching's the same.
Not only is the preaching the same on video, but the preaching's getting very similar, because I know over time it was trending more toward you almost have a preaching script.
Correct.
That everyone's going to go off of.
Yeah.
The worship's the same. How long you're spending in. Honestly, and this is gonna bother some people. They may not believe it, but I think it's worth talking about. This is not, I have both seen this and I have experiences working in it. Sometimes down to the hosting and the prayers and the salvation prayer and everything else, it is scripted and it's on a teleprompter.
So it's not authentic. It's not real.
It feels authentic because when I'm looking at that camera, even at a broadcast campus, when I'm looking at that camera and you're looking at me on the screen, because that's how most people are watching it, I'm making eye contact with you because I'm taught to look at the camera. And when I look at the camera, I'm making eye contact. I switch from camera to camera to camera. So you see me moving, but I'm always making eye contact. But when you look behind you, there's a teleprompter that a lot of churches is going word for word right above that camera. And when you look at it, sometimes there's a person hosting or they're getting ready to pray and they say, you know what, I've just been really burdened for you this week. Well, were you really burdened when everybody had to read that line? Okay. And then it'll say, let me tell you a story about what I've seen God doing in my community lately. Parentheses on the teleprompter, insert personal story here.
That's local. That's to the community.
Yeah, right. But that's all you're doing. So literally down to like hosting and announcements, everything is said the same. And again, there's a lot of good to that, but you've seen how different the communities are, sometimes just 20, 30 minutes away. I think people need to be talked to a little different. And especially when it comes to, this is just my opinion, when it comes to things like prayers and sermons, I don't want somebody preaching to me who is reading a script.
Correct.
Because if you're reading a script, in my opinion, that becomes performing and not preaching. And I want someone who's going to preach and who's going to authentically share what God has given them, not someone who is going to perform off of a script.
Well, and same with worship. So there's a fine line between it's very practiced and polished and it being authentic. Of course, you don't want it to be distracting for people to be able to connect to Jesus. And that's important. That's an important thing. But when you take it and it's the same thing at each campus, but each campus has got different people in the congregation. Are you allowing things to naturally, transpire? But
they can't naturally.
You can't.
Do you know why?
Because we're in a time limit. Everything has to be done at a certain time.
You have to turn the service over every 50 minutes.
Right. And you have to transition to the next thing because we've got announcements and we've got to talk about this video and then we've got to show the video and then we go to the sermon and then we might bring you back out and sing another song to take up the tithing.
Live streaming, we can't have half the campuses joining us. We can't have every campus joining us in different places because people ended different. So now your worship's on a click track and it doesn't matter what you feel happening. You can't do anything else because we're synced up down to the second.
And they would try and say, hey, during this worship moment, being a worship leader, I was asked to be like, hey, I want you to talk about this particular scripture because that's sort of the theme of the message today.
So by worship moment, I'm assuming you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming you mean we stop and we have I'm speaking part,
I'm speaking over you. I'm saying something with you. Sure, absolutely.
A really authentic moment.
Right. It should be.
Yeah.
But I always felt like it felt rushed or it wasn't authentic. It's like I didn't have enough time where I'm a volunteer. I didn't have a lot of time to practice ahead of time. I have a day job, whatever. Then boom, you're practicing that Sunday morning for that services, plural, I should say.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, okay, well, so-and-so said it something like this. Well, I'll just change it a little like that and that'll make it my own.
Yeah.
I didn't feel good about that either. It's like, okay, well, it is what it is. We're still connecting and I'm still speaking over people. But again, it's still it is scripted. It's scripted.
Well, and the time you have to be on time because you have to turn the parking lot around to get all of the services in, to get all the people in.
When do you let the Spirit actually flow? When do we let things happen naturally? What if someone did come forward to the pulpit for prayer, for something really important? What if something...
If you didn't plan it, you can't do it.
Yeah.
So... And I'll say this, the Holy Spirit can preach, or the Holy Spirit can speak in advance. So for some of my charismatic friends, especially my charismatic pastor friends, that's brand new information to you. And you're going to be like, Jeff, I don't agree with that at all. Okay. The Holy Spirit can speak more than just in the moment. Like if you ask him 2 weeks in advance what to preach on, he'll tell you.
Yeah. Right? That's preparing for a sermon.
There's two opposite ends of the spectrum. I got some charismatic friends that, man, your service is going to go 1 hour and 45, 2 hours.
Yeah.
Because your sermon's everywhere because you didn't plan.
Well, I don't want that either, but
in the Multisite Mega Church, when I was preaching, and it was very hard on preachers because I preached every week. It's very hard on preachers because sometimes when I first started and stuff, like in student ministry, you had some wiggle room, like a 5-minute buffer.
Sure.
But when you're preaching and it's going out video streaming or anything like that,
you've got to stay on time.
I remember getting told by a pastor, you're getting the weekend platform. Right? You're getting the weekend platform. It's a huge deal. And I felt very honored. Talking to me and a couple of other people about it, if you go over 1 second on my stage, you'll never be on it again.
Yeah.
Right? And I remember being terrified, Vicki.
You are. And then you almost feel like you're going to go short.
You can't go short. Because if you go short...
You can't go short either.
You can't go short because the announcements are happening at the end, right?
Right.
So in some churches, listen, some churches you can go short, some churches you can't. but it's like I have to finish basically within a 3-second moment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
I can't do anything else. There was a couple of times in student ministry when we weren't streaming somewhere else that I would, we'd get done on time, we'd start on time, but I would change something, or I'd come out and do a worship moment and we'd pray instead of a worship song or whatever. The worship, pastors would be on board with it. Everybody would be on board with it. We talked about it and made it happen. I feel like God is calling us to do this. We get great feedback. But then when my bosses found out that I was changing stuff, they literally locked it down. And 2 weeks later, it was now everybody in student ministry has less ability to change anything. It's more, and it was getting more locked down as we go. So, on one hand, again, it's going to be polished. On the other hand, it does make it seem less authentic.
Well, and it can be,
and it makes it hard for the Holy Spirit to move,
even for the pastor. But it doesn't mean that their messages aren't good.
No, not at all.
It doesn't mean that they haven't prepared ahead of time and thought about things that were on their heart and where God gave them to share. But it is on a very strict time schedule.
Yeah.
And so there's that whole other element you have to consider. So I'm not saying I want to be in church all day.
Whether people laugh at the joke or not, I have to keep saying it because it's so now here's the other thing. And again, this is not every church. Okay, it's not every Multisite Mega Church. So if you go to a Multisite Mega Church, please don't comment at me and don't give me a bunch of grief over this. This may not be your church.
Right.
What I am saying is I've seen it with my own 2 eyes, and it is a lot of your more quote unquote successful top people on this list church. The problem becomes the timing is one thing, but again, the Holy Spirit can move in advance. So let's say that the Holy Spirit is fine. God has said, do this exactly the same way. That is fine for all of these people across multiple states, multiple locations, whatever. Okay. Even if that's the case, at many of these churches, going back to what you talked about earlier, that teleprompter they're reading is a script that someone else wrote for them, or at least 80% of it was written for them. Right. I not only know pastors who do this, I know the people who are writing their sermons, right? I know who's writing their sermons and who's helping them. If they're making any changes, they have to be made with the script writer. Again, maybe that's good if you have teachers, but I think people need to know I'm teaching up here because I'm a good presenter, not make people think, hey, these are my words that God gave me. I think that's dangerous because I think what we trust is when a pastor's preaching, I think we all have a trust that that's what God gave you as you sought him.
Right.
That's the word God gave you for this congregation.
Correct.
And I think it feels very inauthentic. It feels like a bait and switch, and and a lot of times to me, it feels wrong when there's a script writer who is writing it. I want to know if you're an actor, tell me you're an actor. I go to movies all the time. I love good actors. Okay. But when you're reading from a script, you're acting.
Right,
you're performing, you're not preaching.
But then on the same note, you've got some preachers who are great at writing sermons, messages, sharing the word.
There are plenty that don't share that with a script writer because they're awesome at it.
Right, and they're awesome at it. But there are also some that aren't good at delivery. And so I guess finding the balance in that, right? I mean,
it's not like a starting point. It's like 80 to 100% is written for you.
Yeah, something else, especially... Yeah, the trend with the big churches.
Yeah, so I was at a church. Last Christmas we were at a big church for a big Christmas deal with family, right? So we're going to this church. We walk in, and about halfway through the message, I'm like, this is all good and it's true, but it feels flat. It's really good and polished, but it feels flat. Something feels wrong. Mm-hmm. So I remember I did what I do because again, I've been inside the church. I just looked behind me. And lo and behold, teleprompter. Or what churches usually, they don't call them teleprompters because that feels bad. They call them confidence
monitors.
You know that from worship, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We have those too.
So I look back at the confidence monitor, okay? And there are 2 people on stage, okay? The 2 people, it's like a team preaching kind of deal for this Christmas thing because it's not normal. And I realized exactly why I was feeling flat. Because I watched for 5 minutes and they didn't say a word that deviated from the screen.
Right.
So eventually, and this is probably not a good thing to do. I'm sure there were people around me who did not like it because they didn't realize what was going on. But I just elbowed my wife because she knows, I have the issue with the teleprompter. So I elbowed her and I turned around. I'm staring at this teleprompter with people looking at me like, you're looking away from the stage. And I just started preaching it. It was low. It was under my breath. And I finally just looked at my wife and I said, I can preach it better than they can. Let me get up there. Right? And now I'm totally distracted. So maybe I'm just being a jerk, but I'm totally distracted because I know what's coming next. If you're going to do that, just give me the transcript, man. Give me the option to read it.
Yeah.
Right? Can I just mute you and turn on closed captions? Why'd I come? Right? So I think for some people, they're not going to be bothered by that. Other people are going to be. And again, that's not every multi-site mega church. But pastors, I'm just going to tell you, if you're reading a script, you need to tell your people, if you are reading that script and other people are writing most of your sermon, you need to tell your people that you are performing, that you're acting. You can use different words. You can make it sound better than that. But I think people in congregations have a right to know whether their pastors bring in a word that they got from God or they're just preaching something, reading something, performing something that someone else wrote.
Yeah.
I think we have the right to know. Yeah. A lot of people are going to be fine with that. Let's be real. A lot of people are going to be fine with that, and they can stay at your church.
Sure.
Here's some of my concerns. We'll talk about concerns, but we'll also talk about some good stuff in the mega church too. Actually, let's do this. Let's talk about good stuff in the mega church, and we'll start talking about concerns. So I want to bring this together. What's some of the really good stuff that you've seen that makes you excited about the Multisite Mega Church? Because you served for a long time in the Multisite Mega Church. I was a part of staff for a long time. There's a lot that I don't like. There's a reason why I'm not in the Multisite Mega Church now, but there's also a ton of good stuff that's happening.
Absolutely. I think some wonderful things. First thing I can definitely think of is there's lots of opportunity to volunteer and in your community. I think there's a lot of things that larger churches, multi-site churches can reach more people, like at Christmas for outreach. Even thinking and reaching beyond their community globally, they can do a difference. I think
we have more resources, more money, more volunteer man hours,
all of those things, and that equals better opportunities to actually help and serve people. And I think that's a fantastic thing.
Yeah, well, you're not just serving to serve, but you don't really have enough money or manpower to make a difference. Now you have money and manpower to make a huge difference.
Yes.
Especially when there's disasters in a community. The church can mobilize fast. And multi-mega site churches, they have the money and manpower when a hurricane comes through or flooding happens to really love their community.
And you have so many small groups that step up and help their fellow other small groups and families and people in need of the church. And there's a lot of people and capability to do that.
If you just want to meet people, for instance, it's a great place to go meet people because you can serve, you can be in a small group. You can meet as many people as you want. You could
try different volunteer roles so you could find, your community, what feels right to you. Sure.
One of the things that I think is huge, and most people, if you're a professing Christian, this is a really big deal to you. There are usually a lot of professions of faith, a lot of baptisms, okay? Mm-hmm. That's very exciting. People coming to faith, people going public with their faith, and there's usually a lot of new people. If you want to see like new people coming to church all the time and feeling like you're growing, the Multisite Mega Church is predominantly really good at that. Okay. Yes. Like I know one of the churches that I served at, and I've seen this a lot, similar numbers in churches I've consulted with. Sometimes it's less and more depending on the size. But you may have a church that's running 8,000 to 10,000 people a week. Okay. And they're reaching 8,000 to 10,000 new guests a year, brand new people to the church, which is awesome. It actually means you're reaching as many new people as you had at your church. So if you held on to even 25% of them, you'd be growing by 25% every year. Yeah. Right? If you held on to all of them, you'd be double that size every year. Sadly, a lot of those churches are staying the same or going slightly backwards or growing by 5%. Right? So that's really good. There's a lot of good people. There's a lot of new people. There's a lot of baptisms. There's a lot of that we'll talk about this in the downside here in a moment. But it also sadly means there's a whole lot of people that are coming through your doors that aren't connecting, and we don't know what happened to them. Either they're coming through your doors and they're not connecting, or as they're connecting, people who have been connected for a while are leaving as fast as new people are coming in. So that's a bit of a concern. But salvations, baptisms, new people coming in, tons of energy, I think that's huge. So tons of good.
A lot of newness. It is if your only experience has been a certain denomination of a church, a different type of faith, whatever, a multi-site church, there's a lot of them. It's easy to go and attend and check one out. And so
you can sit and do nothing
and just sit and be and take it in or not. Right. Yeah. So
and I know we're not on the downside, but I may not say this in a minute because I don't think it's in my notes. I may forget it. The downside of that is it's easier to get into a consumer Christian mentality.
oh yeah.
I come to church to consume. I come to church to be entertained. But again, you can connect
You
really
can connect
easily
if you want to.
Yeah, there's
People
again,
everywhere.
it's going to feel modern. It's not going to feel like we're chanting an antiquity and something that I don't understand. We're not using these and thous. Even if you're not a believer, a lot of times the message is going to be something that you enjoy. It's going to be practical. A lot of churches, going back to the resources, a lot of larger churches even have things like free mental health counseling and stuff like that for people who attend. That is fantastic.
That's all good.
Now, again, if you have one counselor for 7,000 people, that's more about how you look probably than trying to make a difference, or 3 for 30,000 people or whatever it is. But those things are all awesome. Okay. And I think one of the best things, this is probably my favorite thing about the Multisite Mega Church, is one of the easiest places in the world to invite a friend who's still questioning to.
Oh, absolutely.
A friend who isn't of faith, or they're thinking about re-engaging in church. It's just easy, and it's going to be a great experience for them.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I wish we could talk about a ton more good stuff, and there's probably stuff that we could pull out, but people are listening to this podcast and we're talking about this because there's also a whole lot of negative. And I want to talk about that again because we're asking, is this a failed experiment? Is this sustainable? And it's because for all the good, there's a lot of concerning things about the mega church. I'm going to tell you the number one thing that concerns me, Vicki. And then we'll talk about this and other things. But the number one thing that concerns me, you think about that top 16 list, that top 100 list, you're talking about churches with 60,000, 30,000, 25,000, 20,000, 62 over 10,000. All of these churches we're talking about, they have to be over 2,000 a week to even be in the conversation. Okay? When you think about that, I know hundreds of people just from the last 2 years who have left multi-site mega churches and either have left the church for good. Maybe they still believe and still follow Jesus, but they've left the church either for good or for a season. They're not going to any church. Or a lot of them have left the faith as a whole and they're deconstructing, right? We got people who are watching right now. You've left the faith as a whole and you're deconstructing, and we're glad that you're here because we want to help you heal, right? But here's my question. If I know of hundreds by myself, people who I know their names, I know their stories, who have left these multi-site mega churches, right? And I know that every year that church attendance is going down. Every year the people who call themselves Christians is going down. And these people, there's hundreds I know. So there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, leaving with trauma a year. Is anybody even noticing that they left and why they left? Is anybody reaching out? Does anybody care? Because it's really easy to leave with trauma, to leave the faith altogether, and to walk out a big back door and no one know.
Well, I've wondered the same thing about myself because I haven't officially ever said that I left, but I haven't been back since.
How long has it been since you left, since you stopped attending the multi-site mega church you were at?
I think the last time I served was in October of last year.
October of 22.
Yes.
So almost, as we're recording this, almost a year. I don't know when this released, but it's been almost a year.
Almost. The last time I had spoken to someone was January of this year.
Months ago. And that's when I raised some concerns and, some things that I was not okay about and frustrated with. And I haven't heard from anyone since, except for other people who have left or have been watching this podcast, or other people who left who they haven't heard from anybody else either. So they're finding community with you,
and I think they are starting it is people who have also hey, are you still going? And I'll be like, no, no, I'm not. And they're like, we aren't either.
Yeah.
For
and then
similar
what
reasons.
Do you say next? Do you ask why?
And I'm like,
do you make it awkward?
Right, but I just say I'm sorry. I'm sorry that's happened to you too.
And again, not regardless of the trauma, regardless of why you're not going, my biggest concern, well, not my biggest, but one of my big concerns with the Multisite Mega Church How many people are leaving the church and maybe even the faith and no one's checking in with them because, again, that back door is wide open and you can leave that back door fairly
Right,
anonymous.
because I guess in a way they feel like you're replaceable. It's fine. There'll be other people that'll come in and take your place. It's okay.
Everybody's replaceable as far as a volunteer or a staff member within the organization of the church. That person's not replaceable in the kingdom, though.
Thank you.
And are they, if they're not even a professing Christian when they leave, and I know we always get flack when I talk about this. We have people who say, oh, well, if they left, they weren't ever a professing Christian to begin with, because you can't be a Christian and leave the faith. That's not the point. The point is, if people are leaving the faith, our job was to disciple them, to find out that, hey, you are professing belief, but maybe you're not really a believer yet. What does this look like? Our job is to know what's happening. If someone leaves, we know why they decided to leave.
Right.
If they're leaving and they're not professing faith anymore and no one knows from your church, that's a big deal. And that really, really concerns me. So we'd love to hear from you. If you've left a church out the back door like that, you've left faith, or you've left the church and maybe you still love Jesus, but you're still following Jesus, but you're not going to a church and no one's reached out and checked out. I would love to know, because I'm legitimately wondering how many people this is happening to. I'm not saying it is, but it's a concern because, again, I know hundreds of people who have had the experience you had. Maybe I just have a really weird sample size. Maybe it's because of my story. Maybe it's because of what I went through. Maybe it's because I am a pastor and people are coming to me. But it really does warn me that if that's happening at the same rate with other people in other churches, then there's an issue.
There is an issue there. And it's like, is it because they don't care or they're too busy?
And when we say they, just to clarify, we're not talking about a specific church.
No,
out of the hundreds
general.
of people that I'm talking about, it's been from, a handful of churches for the most part, right?
Sure.
But I wanted to make sure that when we said they, we're talking about Multisite Mega Churches, not one
as
church.
a whole, right, an umbrella.
Again, every time we talk negative about a church or we say they, there are some people who think I'm talking about one church, this church or that church. It's ridiculous. Here's a couple of other concerns that I have, though. So we talk about people leaving. Did anyone ever notice? Let's talk about a couple of specific churches, okay? There are a whole lot of churches who used to be on that top 100 list, used to be in the top 10, used to be, 20, 30,000 people who are now either off that list entirely or they're running 8, 7, 10. What happened? And I'm talking multiples, not just one. What happened to the 20,000 people that aren't at your church anymore? What happened to the 30,000 people, to the 15,000 people, to the 5,000 people that aren't at your church anymore? It's not just that you're farther down on the list. A lot of times they're farther down on the list because there was a moral failure or there was a scandal and the church didn't close, but something happened. What happened to the tens of thousands of people represented?
That's a good question.
Maybe hundreds of thousands, if we put it all together, of people who are represented on that list who are no longer represented. Maybe they're represented in 2019 and they're not represented now, or they were represented in 21 but not in 22, or they were on 22 but they won't be on 23. We have to ask the question, what is happening to those people? We're talking thousands upon thousands. What's happening to them? I'm going to give you a couple of specific examples, though. Have you ever heard of Next Level Church? They're in the Northeast. Josh Gagnon, really charismatic dude, was their pastor. Okay. They're one of the probably the fastest growing, most healthy church in the Northeast, because as you get in the Northeast, you have less of a church demographic, right? Earlier this year, some stuff came out about financial scandals and different abuses, and it came out, and very quickly, in a matter of a couple of weeks, they folded. Josh Gagnon's no longer the pastor. He's no longer the pastor. The church is shut down. From my best guess from the numbers I can find, it looks like about 4,000 or so people were going to Next Level Church and one of their campuses every single week. Now, I'd heard Josh Gagnon, their pastor, I'd heard him on different podcasts. He talked about how, I never set out, he would say, I never set out to build a big church. I set out to build a healthy church. And I just love that we have this healthy big church, right? Well, it turns out it's not healthy, but it is big. It falls, Vicki. They closed literally overnight. Where are those 4,000 people?
Well, that's a great question.
Does anybody know? Are other churches going after them? Do they have a list to give to other people? Here's who we were caring for, and now these are sheep without a shepherd. Okay? Think about this. Mars Hill. A lot of people are familiar with Mars Hill now. If you're not, you've been living under a rock, and I need you to go listen to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast so you know what we're talking about. Okay? But most people, whether you're a Christian or not, you're familiar with Mars Hill Church. Mark Driscoll, we talked about him on this podcast before. But again, years ago now, they were one of these first really big multi-site mega churches, blowing and going, fast growing in the Seattle area. Okay. They had huge scandal, abusive pastor. He gets removed. The churches have to close down in just a few months. They were averaging over 6,000 people a week. Over 6,000 people a week. They closed down. What happened to all those people? And beyond that, Vicki, we don't know what happened to all those people. Can you think, did you watch Rise and Fall of Mars Hill?
I have not.
Or you listened to it?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you're one of those people living under a rock.
I'm not living under a rock. I've heard of Mars Hill.
Well, they're long, like our podcasts. They're quite long episodes. So.
Well, I've got time. I'll do it.
It's investigative reporting. It's not conversations like this. It's investigative reporting. And just from the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, from certain message boards that are out there, different online communities, I know of thousands that have traumatic stories that say, I still struggle to go to church. My faith has never been the same. And many who, even on the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, there are ones who would say, some even pastors, I don't really consider myself a believer anymore. I don't really go to church. I don't know, how I feel about that. Between these two churches, and we know there are people who have completely walked away from the faith or walked away from practicing the faith with other community members. Between those two churches alone, the most conservative estimate that we have, that's 10,000 people, and we don't know what happened to them. Yet 10,000 people in a faith community that just disappeared.
Yet these churches would be the first to sing a song about leaving the 99.
Well, they would have been before they closed down.
That's what I'm saying. Hanging. They, talk about how Jesus left the 99 for the one, but nobody seems to be concerned about where these people are going.
And again, let's think about the bigger trend. There are less and less normal-sized churches every month. Right. There are more and more mega churches every month. If you were at Next Level or if you were at Mars Hill, here's what I can almost guarantee you. You don't feel comfortable going back to another multi-site mega church right now, because even if it's a great church, you've been traumatized and you don't want any more of that.
No, and you can't trust. Your trust is broken.
You were there because you loved that pastor and ministry and you gave your life to it because you thought it was awesome. And then you find out that there was a bunch of deception going on. There was moral failure. There was spiritual abuse. There was sexual abuse. There's all these things, right? If that's you, you are not going to feel comfortable going most likely to another multi-site megachurch. Yet there are less and less normal churches that are operating with excellence because they're selling their buildings, they're closing down. And a lot of it is because their people are leaving for the megachurch down the street. What happens when people are leaving like this and all they have is the mega church or something that looks close to it? Again, there's a lot of good, but there's a lot that's challenging. So Brandon Billings from Belmont University, they published a paper. You know how professors and doctoral candidates and all that, they publish these the papers. One of the recent papers that they published in the last few years, it said this, and this is a quote. I want to make sure that I get it. One of the specific challenges for the megachurch, is the problem of potential abuse by pastors. These pastors are characterized by toxic and destructive leadership. In recent years, many Christians, as well as non-Christians, have been shocked by the number of megachurch pastors. Shocked by the number of megachurch pastors revealed as bullies, narcissists, and sexual assailants. So you got this academic paper being written on this that says one of the biggest issues facing the modern day multi-site megachurch is that there is a trend. This is not one, this is not two, this is not three. There is a trend now of toxic and destructive leadership, There's a trend of bullies, narcissists, and sexual assailants as these charismatic pastors. And Christians and non-Christians alike are at the same time, while multi-site megachurches are growing faster than any other churches, culture at large is starting to say we're distrusting these organizations. We're distrusting these institutions. We're distrusting that slick pastor who I want to listen to because they sound great, but I'm wondering, are they another moral failure? Are they another bully? What are they doing? And with this podcast, if you've been listening, if this isn't your first episode, most of what we're talking about, we're actually disclosing that because there are more bullies, more narcissists, more sexual assailants than you could believe in the multi-site megachurch. There's also more incredible men and women of God than you'd believe. But you have these people who are at the front, who are getting all this power as these lead and executive pastors, too many of them, definitely not all of them, there are some fantastic ones, but too many of them are going down these narcissistic, bully, trauma, abusive, destructive roles. Those are the roads they're going down. So again, one of the things that bothers me about the Multisite Mega Church is that there's so much abuse and narcissism and bullying that culture at large has started to take notice.
Yes. And rightly so, but also that it causes, I think they get caught up too in this whole idea it's run like a business, and not in the business of caring for people, but in a business of leadership and power. I think it gets to their heads. I think we get a little money flowing, and that definitely feeds a bad seed.
Yeah. And whether you want it to be about the money or not, whether you want it to run like a business or not, there's no way for churches to be running 20, 30, 40, 60, 85,000 and it not run like a corporation.
Absolutely,
so when it runs like a corporation, Vicki, you're going to have some of the same problems, scandals, and legal issues that a corporation has.
Absolutely.
That's why NDAs are in the church, because we're running like corporations.
Right. Which that we've talked about that a little bit, but this is where it's all concerning, because who's holding these people accountable?
Well, we talked about that. In a lot of cases, nobody, because they've created an organizational structure to protect power. Right.
So you have that happening, and we're humans. Pastors are humans. People in leadership are humans. They unfortunately can get caught up in a lot of it, and it's just like a downward spiral. And
when you get control,
you're affecting too many people when you were at this mega thousands of people.
We're talking about tens of thousands. So you think about this. It's human nature. This is not just church leaders. It's human nature. You get power, you get money, you want to hold on to it. We want control. Okay. Now, these big churches are running a lot like corporations. There's good running like a business. Okay, I'm a business consultant. I'm pro-business. There's good there to a church running like a business. I'm a church consultant as well. I help churches build a lot of systems that look like business systems. Okay, it's not all bad. At the same time, okay, there are certain parts of running like a corporation that is completely incompatible with Scripture. Now, the church, though, is a poor imitator of culture. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Every time we try to imitate culture, the problem is we may, no matter how good you look or sound, you'll always be a poor imitation of culture. Part of being a poor imitation of culture means that churches are also poor imitations of corporations. We want to look like, act like, run like a corporation, but we're a poor imitation of that. So how many corporations do you know that are worth, millions and billions of dollars that pick their leader based on nepotism and say, oh, well, our CEO is really good, so we're going to give it to his son? That doesn't happen in big corporations. It happens in small mom and pop businesses, right?
Yeah, true. Okay? True.
The majority, not all, the majority of multi-site mega churches follow the same succession strategy. Who is the son with the same last name that's most equipped to take this over? Who is the son-in-law that could take this over? And they keep it in the family like a family business. This isn't like a board. This isn't like the board of a corporation that goes out and finds the new CEO. Okay. It's a lot of times it's who's related so that we can keep the church the same. So you got the church imitating corporations, but acting like a family business with little accountability to keep control. And there's a reason why even in corporations, CEOs don't go unchecked for a reason, because they will always make it crash and burn. You have to have accountability.
You have to have accountability. Absolutely.
Right. But again, in church and Christianity, it's really easy to keep it in the family, and that feels good. And it's not always bad.
No, it's not always bad.
It's happening way too often to be a good strategy, right? Mm-hmm. Let's think about this. You get past the leadership issues, the bullying, the abuse, and all that. One of the big concerns a lot of people have, and by the way, going back to this, and we talk about people leaving the multi-site mega church because of bullying, abuse, narcissism, and all those things. Guys, some of y'all are saying, Jeff, that's just because your experience and you're bitter. And you're just talking about your experience because you're bitter. That's not every church, okay? It's not just because I'm bitter. Now, some of you were saying you're just reading a bunch of articles and that's news media trying to trash the church. That's not all of these churches, okay? Every single week when we do an episode, I'm getting messages, I'm getting comments by real people who are saying, thank you for giving us a voice. I've experienced all these things.
Same.
So whether you know it or not, it's not just us being bitter. It is not just the media trying to paint churches out to look bad. I'm telling you, every single week we're hearing from more and more and more of you that say, no, that's been my experience. There is every church and every Multisite Mega Church and every Multisite Mega Church leader, pastor is not a narcissistic bully. They're not a spiritual abuser. But there are way too many narcissistic bullies and abusers in our pulpits, and that's got to stop. We've got to get to the point where there's accountability to check them and where people will stand up and say something. Okay, Vicki, you want to know the number one thing I can do to piss people off with this podcast? Right? And it's great when I piss people off because the more controversial something is, the more views we get.
Well, the word you just said might offend somebody. Sorry.
Oh, me saying pissed you off, then piss off of this podcast. It's not for you. Like literally, if that bothers you, you're not our target audience.
We're just going to be real here. So
we really do love you. You're not our target audience. Okay. No. But if I want to piss people off, here's what I do. Okay. I post a clip from one of the podcast episodes where I say anything that challenges pastors or honoring pastors. And hateful, arrogant, committed church-going Christians will jump in and fight me in the comments and the mentions.
Wow.
One of the most, from the first, few weeks of the podcast, I'll never forget because it was the first time that I was like, oh my gosh, this is literally growing because so many people hate it. It was the amount of Christians. I just posted something about the toxic dishonor or the toxic honor of feeling like you have to call your pastor by his title.
Oh, right, okay? Right.
People lost their minds. They didn't listen to the video. They didn't listen to the context. They didn't listen to anything else they said. They were willing to fight me on, I call my pastor, and that is not worship of man. That is not idol worship. There's nothing wrong with that. I had people call me names you wouldn't believe. Had to block and restrict because it was bad. The ones I left on there, things like you have a spirit of dishonor. What Bible are you reading? Stuff like that. So, and I'm just saying this. Here's the point of that. If I want to piss people off and have a mob after me with pitchforks and torches, all I have to do is say something bad about their pastor. That's the reason why so many narcissists and bullies are drawn to the pulpit, because they are protected by people who now identify with them. And hey, I identify with you. Our church is successful. I want our church to be good. I love your preaching. So I will overlook you treating people like absolute garbage to protect you, to protect my church, to protect the identity.
And make excuses for them.
Not only they make excuses for them, there is no reason why. Okay, it's kind of fun, the amount of atheists and the amount of antagonistic atheists. Because I know we have atheists listen to the podcast and you guys love it. We're super glad that you're here because you like the conversations. But antagonistic atheists who just want to tear the Bible down, tear the church down, because I was ever a pastor or the churches in our podcast title, they hate me. They're leaving all kinds of stuff, right? They're actually fun conversations. Sometimes I have to restrict them because they're being super mean and demeaning to our community,
sure,
to people.
Yeah.
But those are fun conversations. It should never be true that the most arrogant, mean, and abusive people online are church people.
Never.
And I hear from a lot of Christians who say thank you. So it's not all of them.
Oh, of course not.
But the most arrogant, mean, and abusive comments we get, messages that we get, are from Christians. And that shouldn't be that way, right? But that shows why it's so easy for narcissists and bullies to get in the pulpit and stay in the pulpit.
Yeah, and I like that when you brought up the fact that, if you identify, your identity is attached to your church and your, of course, the pastor, the leaders. Well, it's great that you have community, but
absolutely.
However, the overlooking part is the key that really, hit home to me. That was the key word that hit home to me because I could say there were people that I love and care about that I served with, that I attended small group with, that I felt were my safe space to say I'm concerned about how certain things are going in my volunteer role.
Seeing things at church that scare me.
Or seeing something that I'm uncomfortable with, right, all those things. And it was discussed, but it was also either overlooked or, of course, well, you just need to go talk to so-and-so about that. Okay. So when I finally did that, I've nothing.
They either do nothing or don't talk to you.
Right. So it's that
But
overlook.
people don't want to talk about it.
Oh, okay. You've now got proof. We know the end result now, and they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to change. You've brought it up, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to continue to overlook it because they're still going to attend the church and still serve that church because their identity is tied to it. But my hurt didn't seem to matter.
And honestly, that's the worst hurt sometimes.
Right.
It's not even that the church or the church leader hurt you or someone else.
It's the people that you trusted in your inner circle.
That they either left you high and dry or ignored it or minimized it. So I talked to a person today from our community. I'm not going to name their names or tell their story or anything, but was talking to them. We had coffee and they were telling me about, a situation in church where a person close to them saw something that was wrong, followed Matthew 18 behind closed doors. Hey, there's sin here. We need to take care of this. The way this person was treated wasn't okay. I still love the church. I'm still going to be here, but we need to deal with this sin, right? There was a lot of pushback. People didn't want to repent. So he starts getting proof together to bring. And now because they realize he's got proof together to bring, what they did was multiple leaders, spouses of pastors that are at the top, start gossiping about this person.
Oh, man.
And they start saying things that are uncorroborated and untrue about them. And then before long, they say, oh, this person's, they're gossiping and they're trying to, turn people against us. And they come up with fake reasons to disfellowship this person.
Wow.
They disfellowship them. They're not allowed in the church anymore. And the only reason they did it, the person who's telling me, was brokenhearted. They're not leaving this church because something happened to them. They're leaving this church because they watched someone get disfellowshipped, because the moment that he had proof to call them on their sin, they went ahead and just destroyed his character so that when he brings it, it looks like he's just bitter and it's not real.
And how is that being a Jesus follower?
It's not.
Right.
And again, that's not every mega church, every multi-site church, but it's easiest to do in a multi-site mega church because the power structure.
And it's so large.
Yeah. And again, people will protect it sometimes, even when they say, I don't feel good about what's going on, but we have to protect this because look at the tens of thousands we're reaching.
And how much good we're doing.
Even good people are asking the same question we're asking, what would happen to all these people?
Right.
And now, because we don't know what would happen to all these people, we'll let the 10 and 20 a year that are getting absolutely destroyed get destroyed and sweep it under the rug for the greater good.
For the greater good.
Which is not okay.
No,
and it only grows with every year.
Well, it's only just a few families that have left. Well, that you know about, right? That you make the person making that comment is like, maybe that's the only two that you know about. What about all the others that you don't know about?
And a lot of times it's small, but we have instances in the news from the last couple of years where it was covering up 2 allegations of rape.
Yeah.
It was covering up allegations of physical abuse, right?
So if you can cover up small sins and lies,
it's easier to cover up big sins.
Correct.
Right. And the more you cover it up, the more bold these narcissistic and bullying leaders get. I'm so grateful for the leaders that can finish the race well and love people well.
Amen.
But
yes.
for every pastor who's finishing the race well and loving them well in these scenarios, there are others that are literally wolves in sheep's clothing that are being protected for the sake of protecting people. Right. Now, a couple other things that I just want to make sure that we mention that really do concern me. I am concerned about the financial impropriety that keeps coming up at a lot of these churches.
Same.
And maybe we're only hearing about it because there are a lot of finances, but there are a lot of financial issues from fraud, from embezzlement, misuse of funds. And again, people have different ideas of misuse of funds. For me, I know it always bothered me when, I still remember watching hundreds of thousands of tithing dollars getting thrown away in decorations from one year to the next simply because we have enough in the budget, we'll buy new stuff.
Or costumes.
Not donated, thrown away, Vicki.
Costumes. Right? Yes, I've heard about this.
When I say financial impropriety, I'm not just talking about embezzlement. I'm not just talking about fraud. I'm talking about that stuff, misuse of tithe money, hush money and NDAs coming from tithe money, lavish trips. right? That are paid for with tithe money.
Yeah.
Where you realize people are just taking vacations. There's a lot of stuff like that, even down to really small things. And we talked about this off air before we hit the record button. But there's a lot of churches that are hosting like top givers dinner or best givers dinners, and they're treating people very different with different levels of honor based on what they give, which is unscriptural. So from big things like embezzlement and fraud to those smaller things, it just seems like, man, it's every couple of months there's something else coming out with financial impropriety. And a lot of these churches are a part of the same like organizations like the EFCA, I don't even remember what it stands for, but they basically say, hey, we're coming alongside and saying that these churches are really taking care of their finances. They're buttoned up and you can trust them. Well, I've watched it in enough churches now to know that's just a rubber stamp. And it doesn't mean anything, right? Down to the financial issues. And this, we talked about this a little bit before, but I think it's worth saying again, the fact that churches are the only nonprofits in the United States that can hide behind that, the 990 form.
Right.
And because you're a church, you don't have to report what people are making. You don't have to report what's going on. Other nonprofits do, because if people are giving, there should be transparency.
Right.
And very few churches, even if they give you an annual report, it's like 4 lines. You don't know what it is. So I know of one person, right? Go into a large multi-site mega church. They're very involved in worship. They were giving, they're probably giving $50,000+ a year. They are a big tither. They're blessed. They love their church. Okay. But they were sitting on some like leadership boards, and for the first time actually saw some budgets. And they found out that more was spent on haze in their church. The fog, more was spent on haze than was spent on missions.
What?
And they literally, it took about 6 months, but they couldn't stay at the church when they couldn't let go of it. They had to end up changing churches because they said, we cannot give as much as we give, knowing that more is spent on haze for praise and worship environment than on missions and helping people. That's a true story.
That's mind-blowing. I mean, I would go out the door with them too, and I would have part of a worship team. Like, that's, wow.
Right?
Where are our
But
priorities?
that's another.
Where are our priorities?
That's
here?
another example of financial impropriety, though. But if there was transparency, more people would say that. And when you get a little bit of pressure, you're going to go, okay, maybe we don't spend so much on haze. And maybe people go, I love the environment, but we don't love the environment that much.
I'd rather help people.
Yeah. More haze, more praise, or less haze, more missions? It's a question.
It is
a question worth asking. And I'm not against haze. I love me some haze. I love me some good worship.
I actually hate it, Jeff, because it gets you in your throat when you're trying to sing, and sometimes they really love to pipe that stuff in there.
You want to know my favorite? My favorite is, and I've been at multiple churches this has happened at, you start doing haze at a campus, you start doing haze just at the church, but you don't know how to use it. You don't get the right kind for your fire alarms, and you set off the fire alarm as soon as you use haze.
I've been in an Easter service and the fire alarms went off. We kept singing. Yes, well, fans. You got to have fans. No, it looks great, but wow.
I've also seen the building had to be evacuated for like a fire, and it totally messes it up. Was the haze worth it? I don't know. Okay. A few other things that, concern me. We talked about, this trend or this question of, are multi-site churches buying up the buildings, taking the members? Are they slowly devouring regular churches? Mm-hmm. Right? That's a big concern for me, but we won't spend much time on it. Here's probably the biggest concern I have, period. Lack of discipleship.
Yeah.
It is, I have not found it yet. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I am saying I've not found a way to do this yet. So in my opinion, it is next to impossible to disciple 20, 30, 40, 85,000 people well. Okay. I've been at churches that were, running 6,000, 10,000, whatever. It's next to impossible to disciple people well. What do we say? How do you disciple people in a big church like that? Through small groups.
Small groups.
Okay. I have been a small groups pastor. Can I tell you, as a former small groups pastor, we are not discipling people in most small groups. There are a few, but in most small groups, what we're building community, which is fantastic.
Which is good.
Right? But you're not discipling people. You can't do enough life on life, and the people who are supposed to be discipling you aren't equipped enough to disciple you. So we talk about two things. We mentioned this earlier, but the lack of discipleship, which leads to spiritual growth, biblical literacy, people being able to, and I think this is a big reason, Vicki, why people are leaving the faith when they have bad experiences in these churches. Because while they had a good experience up until their trauma, they weren't discipled, so their faith can't handle. Without discipleship, their faith can't handle a trauma like that.
Yeah.
when we disciple people and they get to grow up in the faith, your faith can handle some severe trauma.
Sure.
And I think the only difference between me staying in the church and a lot of friends and people leaving the church and leaving the faith is that I was discipled and they weren't, right? The lack of discipleship and the lack of pastoral care, okay? Because again, I had hundreds of volunteers the last church that I was at. I had, thousands of people that I was responsible for in one form or another. About 1,000, not thousands, about 1,000. And it was hard because sometimes when a pastor did need to get involved, a hospital visit, death, I'm there with people I barely know because I didn't pastor them until those huge moments. I wasn't allowed to pastor until those huge moments. So that lack of discipleship and pastoral care, it grieves me.
Yes, of course. And the fact that, so you place a lot of, and because it's happened to me, you place a responsibility on volunteers. If you're in a volunteer role and you're supposed to then care for these other people, but nobody's really shown me how to do, maybe I don't feel comfortable in doing it, but I've been asked to do this. Yeah. So, well, it's just a check-in. It's just praying for them or whatever. But
it's simple. You'll be fine. Yet you feel uncomfortable. I can't care
right.
for this
Well,
person
I don't think I'm qualified, or maybe I'm not qualified yet, right? And the other thing I would like to add about this discipleship too
Instead of them answering that, though, and giving you resources and helping to disciple you, the answer is you'll be fine, go and do it anyway. Right there, and I've heard that from so many people, you share a concern, and the concern is I'm not equipped to do what I'm supposed to do. They minimize it, tell you there's no reason for the concern, and basically reformat it as if you continue to have the concern, it's because you're not faithful. Have faith. God will give you what you need.
That check your heart part again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but no, the other thing I wanted to add to it is in the discipleship is the, a lot of sermons at megachurches are about reaching the unchurched and people who are new to attending church, which is great. But then where is the discipleship and care given to people who have been attending a long time or have been a part of church in some form or another, not new to the faith, but want to grow in their faith?
Yeah.
How do they grow in it when it's only, when they're, the only sermons that they have is about either tithing or being, someone new, and like there's an altar call every time. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but
there's nothing wrong with it. You can be seeker sensitive and you can have your messages tailored to people who are young in the faith or don't have faith.
Sure.
But you also have to provide a way for the people who have been with you to grow in their faith.
Right.
Otherwise, again, you have, it's like the parable of the sower and the seed. You have plants that sprout up, but they don't have roots, and they wither. And this is something, man, I hate hearing this in the church. I'm so tired of this. You'll hear this from Christians all the time. Okay. You'll have someone who says, a mature believer, I'm thinking about leaving this church, or I left this church, and they're not downing the church. Okay. Sometimes people are asking them, why are you leaving? And they simply say, I don't feel like I'm getting fed enough.
Yeah.
Okay. They're not attacking the church.
Yeah.
Not doing anything. And I have heard pastors behind closed doors crush people over that. Oh, they think they're better. They must not care about lost people. They're not getting fed enough. But they'll say stuff like this. And Christians, we say this too often. Somebody says, I'm leaving this church, or I think about leaving this church because I'm not getting fed enough. And we'll say, oh, you're always worried about being fed. Maybe you should learn how to pick up your own spoon and fork and feed yourself. I've said that. I've heard other people saying that. And
Wow.
You don't come to church to be fed. You come to church to serve. You don't come to church just to be fed. You come to church to help see other people come to Jesus. And what they do, they make you feel incredibly guilty for saying, I'm not getting fed here. Okay. I see stuff on social media about it all the time, memes and everything else. Church is not about you being fed. Don't leave a church because you're not getting fed enough. It's not their responsibility to feed you. Get off the milk and feed yourself. And I get all that. I have said all of that as a pastor. And I was wrong. And here's how I know I was wrong. There's nothing wrong with being fed. Now, do you need to graduate from milk to meat? Yes.
Sure.
From the milk of the faith to the meat of the faith? Yes.
Yes.
But what did Jesus tell Peter? If you love me, feed my sheep.
Right.
Because it doesn't matter how smart or how mature of a sheep it is. That sheep is never going to get its own food.
Right.
Food is to be put out for it.
Well, and I can't help and continue to help other people if I'm not also taken care of. Like, yeah, I have to be able to continue to grow and be nurtured if I gonna help do that for other people, like helping reach other people, as they're saying. So,
and you're not spoon feeding that sheep as a shepherd, but
No.
what you are is if you don't move them around and give them new places to graze, they will
And to
kill
grow.
everything.
Yeah.
They'll stop growing. They'll stop maturing. So again, church is not all about you being fed, but yes, it is okay to say, I need to be
I need a
fed
little
and mature.
something.
That's discipleship.
I mean, we're all in different seasons at different times. So yeah.
Yeah. A few other things, we don't really talk about them a ton, but I just want to mention them because, we need to start landing the plane with the podcast today. But I'm thinking multi-site mega churches are some of the worst with political entanglement in the last 5 years I've ever seen. And politics, and I may make a lot of people mad because every time we talk about politics on the podcast, we make people mad. I'm not taking a side. I'm simply saying your church should always run countercultural to your politics, no matter what party you're a part of, because the kingdom rules and kingdom decisions are different than political decisions and political rules, okay? Jesus wouldn't have been a Republican, and Jesus wouldn't have been a Democrat, okay? Kingdom people should always bristle a little bit. But churches are talking so much about a lot of these big multi-site mega churches are talking so much about politics, it's hard to know the difference. I literally heard a clip the other day where a pastor I mentioned on the top 16, I'm not going to say which one, but a pastor I mentioned on the top 16 largest churches in the country said no pastors are talking about this, but our church will. Not enough pastors are talking about it. The biggest issue facing Christianity, facing the kingdom in the United States of America is wokeism. And then he spent the next little bit just talking about wokeism. Now look, I'm not talking about wokeism on this podcast at all, and I don't care what you think about that. But that is not the biggest issue facing the church. Okay? And if you think that's the biggest issue facing the church, talk to people in other countries who are being murdered and martyred for their faith. Okay? That is not the biggest issue facing the church. Even if you think it's an issue facing the church, it's not the biggest issue facing the church, and that should not be the main point of a sermon.
No.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's part of the issue. We talked about some of the diversity issues, like multi-site mega churches are extremely homogenous. They are mainly white. They are mainly middle-aged, especially in leadership. They are mainly male, okay? If the majority of our churches, the majority of our Christians are going to multi-site mega churches, and that's where the trends are going, then it scares me for how little diversity the kingdom has in America.
Yeah.
If that's the picture of church in America,
and that's not the picture of America.
It's frighteningly undiverse.
Yeah, very.
We're leaving people behind at an incredible rate.
Incredible rate, because last time I checked, America is the most diverse it has been in many years.
Let me just tell you, heaven's not going to be predominantly white.
No, it's not.
And for people who expect heaven to be predominantly white, here's a spoiler alert: Jesus isn't white. Okay, there's a whole lot of Christians. I am worried. There are a lot of Christians. I'm worried about you that when you get to heaven, you're going to be trying to pick a bone with Jesus, asking why all these not white people are there. Or you're going to ask Jesus, you hear about people saying, hey, when I get to heaven, I can't wait to ask Jesus a question. I don't think we're really going to ask Jesus a question that way. It's not going to be the first thing that we're going to do. But there are some Christians that their first question they would ask is, hey, Jesus, where are all the white people at? Okay, if that's your question, please don't ask that. It is not going to go well. But our churches don't look like the kingdom. They don't look like heaven. And again, that's a lot of churches. Churches are still one of the, the church hour is still one of the most segregated hours of the week, right? But if we're talking about the multi-site mega church and how fast it's growing and how other churches are shrinking and going, basically going out of business, right? Then I think we have to say something with, if that's the case, then if it's going to survive, the multi-site mega church has to be much more diverse. It can't just be white men.
And it has to be legitimate. Yeah.
And we're not talking about just, leadership and stuff like that. We're talking about attendance being so heavily skewed Caucasian.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I want to end with this quote though, right? Because we could talk about, mimicking celebrity culture more. There's all of that. But I want to end with this quote from Tim Keller. And the late Tim Keller passed away earlier this year. Most people, regardless of where you land, have respect for Tim Keller. He ran the race. It seems from all indications like he ran the race well and he finished well. Tim Keller was also the pastor of a multi-site mega church. And he said, I never set out to do that. He said this though, from the mouth of one of the most respected Multisite Mega Church pastors who, from all we know, it seems like he was never even close to a scandal. Incredible man of God said this: mega churches are poor places for faith formation and pastoral care. I'm not saying that all multi-site mega churches need to close, that they're not good, but I am saying I agree with Tim Keller. From my experience, multi-site mega churches are poor places for faith formation and pastoral care, which means we need to protect more than just the multi-site mega church, or we need to change the model so it's a better place for faith formation, for discipleship, and for pastoral care. So really the question we've asked this whole time, I want to get to it because we've been all around it, but in your mind, as we're talking about, is the multi-site mega church a failed experiment? We know it's not today because it's still growing, but we also know that there's a heavy line behind the bus of bullied, broken people and abuse victims.
Yes.
Right? But beyond that, do you think the multi-site church is a failed experiment that people are going to start seeing the failures of soon? Do you think it's still fun and redeemable, but is failing and something has to change before it fails? Or would you say, and maybe there's another option, but these are the three options I see, that do you think that the multi-site megachurch is successful and will be successful until it fully cannibalizes church in America and then kills church as we know it decades from now?
Well, I think there's a part of me that feels it's two of those options. I think it's successful right now, obviously, if we look at proof in numbers and attendance and locations and all the things. But I think it's failing in a lot of ways because we're not really being authentic and really reaching people, doing some great things, but not as a whole. I think what in my opinion, this is my opinion, but I picture and I think about what would Jesus feel about these mega churches. Yeah. I don't think he'd like what he's seeing.
No, there's that, you've probably seen this on social media, but it's the meme that goes around that if Paul was writing letters today, our church would be getting one.
Yeah.
Our church would be getting one.
There would be a lot, right? Absolutely. And so I think
Jesus would be flipping some tables too.
I think he'd be flipping some big time tables.
People would have a hard time with that. Why are you flipping tables?
Right. And I think he would see, he definitely would see the good, but there's a lot of things that needs to change, needs to be fixed. If everybody was on board and they realized, hey, here's the things that aren't working. If you're going to help people just start these things up, are you holding yourselves accountable to each other and making sure that things are going well? And if not, then help each other make them go better. If not, then they will continue to cannibalize and they'll take over. And I'm afraid there won't be a lot left for people to attend. And I hope that a lot of people don't leave the faith, but they could. But I think you even mentioned it earlier before we started the podcast was, do we see churches starting in the homes again? Because it crossed my mind. I thought, well, I've got enough small circle of friends that we've all left, and not just the same church, we just have that in common. And I thought, well, we've talked about that before. Maybe we could just gather together, even if it's just to watch another multi mega church online. Gosh. But, could we do something together? It's a possibility. That's the way so if the trends continue, and I'm not trying to give my opinion, this is just if the trends continue and smaller churches keep closing down, multi-site mega churches keep growing, and we keep planting and adding multi-site mega churches, because again, the ARC model, start big, stay big, all that. If we keep doing that, again, from my role as a pastor, a church consultant, I can tell you this. In most of the multi-site mega churches that I have been around, the back door is open as wide, if not wider, than the front door. So again, go back to that example earlier. We have 10,000 first-time guests coming through this year, yet we didn't grow, barely grew, or we shrunk, right? So
One of the things I remember talking to a church about this, it was, hey, everybody in your city knows you. And for a long time, what it was people were always inviting people to come, their friends to come, their family to come to your church because it was the best show in town, right? And they would invite people to come and they would love it and check it out and stay for a while. And maybe they stayed, maybe they left, whatever. But you've always had thousands of first-time guests coming in because you're the best show in town and there's always people who haven't seen you and heard you. And I said, over about a decade, you've done that so much that the reason why you're seeing a shift is because there are very few people in your city that don't know who you are.
Right.
There are very few people in your city that haven't formed an opinion about you. So if they love you, they're already there.
And if they don't love you,
they're not there. So there comes a point where the only first-time guests you're going to be getting are people who have moved into the city who have not formed their opinion yet, right? And there will come a day where if you continue these trends, more people leaving every year at the back door than coming in, when you no longer have enough people to come through the front door, your church will slowly cannibalize itself, right? I think it's the same thing for the Multisite Mega Church movement as a whole. I believe this is where we're at. Yes, I believe Multisite Mega Church is wildly successful right now if you just look at attendance numbers and baptism numbers. But I think if we look, there's another set of numbers we need to look at, pastors of Multisite Mega Churches. There's another set of numbers we have to look at that's way more important, and it's how many people are leaving out your back door, and are they re-engaging with another church? Okay? And look, from my experience as a consultant, my experience as a pastor, I'm going to tell you this. I believe I'd be willing to put 2 mortgage payments on it. That's how much I believe in it. I'd put 2 mortgage payments on this. Out of that top 100 largest churches in America list, probably less than 5 of them are tracking the number and could tell us how many people left through the back door.
Yeah.
And
I agree.
even less than them, perhaps none of them, could tell us whether those people who left re-engaged with another church or not. So, hey, attendance numbers are great, but attendance numbers don't tell the whole story. And if our back door of people leaving who are hurt and broken and traumatized is larger than our front door, there's a problem. So here's what I would say. I believe wholeheartedly that the Multisite Mega Church can get better. I probably am about 60-40 that it could succeed.
Sure.
I'm about 40% sure. About 40%, I would say, I don't know that it can. I think we're at a pivotal moment. This doesn't look like any of the churches we saw in Scripture, but I'm not saying it can't work. I'm probably 60% it could work, but it would have to change. We would have to put an emphasis on discipleship. We would have to put an emphasis on pastoral care. And until I've never seen it work, until the Multisite Mega Church can come up with a system that allows people to be cared for and discipled on such a large scale, it's not going to work. But it's going to look like it's working until it's not. And here's my fear. This is one man's opinion, educated with a lot of data. My fear and my opinion is that if we don't do something, 20 to 30 years from now, we're going to look up and we're going to think the Multisite Mega Church in America is successful as ever, until all of a sudden we notice more people are moving out the back door of the church in America as a whole than the front door. And about a decade after that, the church will be destroyed in America. When I say that, the church is never going to be destroyed. No one can ever destroy Jesus' church. But when I say destroyed, I'm saying church as we know it. And I believe, Vicki, that's what will happen if we don't change something. Multisite Mega Churches will cannibalize themselves so there's nothing left.
Yep.
And church will essentially reboot in America as house churches, things like that maybe are persecuted. I don't even know. But I don't think we're headed in a good direction if we keep doing the same thing and we don't change anything. I think it's dangerous. Do I want Multisite Mega Churches to fold and fail? No. But we've got to talk about it. There's got to be a better way because the trends and the numbers are not good. And pastor, no matter what size church, if you're watching this, no matter what size church you pastor, if you don't know the data on how many people are leaving out your back door and whether they're re-engaging with another church, you honestly need to probably stop counting all of those other things because your first responsibility is to feed and care for the sheep that have been entrusted to you. So,
not much else to say but that.
I think we leave this way. I think, and tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth. I think we leave this podcast episode with so much we love and want to see work in the Multisite Mega Church. I think we leave with hope because we know great people in the Multisite Mega Church. We see so much good that can be done. I think we leave with big belief that it can be done.
Yes.
And it can be something that puts a smile on the face of God.
Absolutely.
But I think there's a lot of trepidation and anxiety. I think there's a feeling overall, and I would say, I'm guessing here because they're not here, I would say probably all of our podcast hosts, that all of that hope and all of that belief means nothing if something doesn't change. Because I feel very sure that if things don't change, then at the end of the day, if they don't change, we'll look back in history and say the Multisite Mega Church was actually one of the most harmful things that happened to the church in North America.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that's not the case.
Me
I'm
too.
hoping that things change. And again, if you're pastoring a Multisite Mega Church and you say, hey, Jeff, I want to work on these things, I want to get better, contact me. Let me know. Whether it's me or other consulting groups, we'll connect you with them. I don't know the answers. None of us know the answers, but we've got to start working on them until we find them.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you've been at a Multisite Mega Church and you've been hurt, you've been traumatized, and you say, hey, a lot of this stuff stuck out today. I'm not sure what to do, how to re-engage with the church. I've tried to go to churches because I like that style, but I'm having a hard time connecting. Join the community, talk to other people who are going through that, reach out, talk to us. Again, check out East Tennessee Mentorship, check out Rob Scott with the Forgiveness Link. They can help you work through some of those triggers and trauma as well, so that maybe a good mega church doesn't trigger you. But whatever you do, if you're still following Jesus, we don't want you to disengage from the church as a whole. We want to help you re-engage without being traumatized every time you step through the door. But we want you to know we're here for you. So if you need anything, reach out to us. We're always going to respond to as many comments and messages as we can. At the same time, there's sometimes more messages that we can respond to, and we're always going to put the community first. But we want you to know that you're loved. We want you to know that you're cared for, that you're not alone. And pastors, Multisite Mega Church pastors, we believe in you. Mm-hmm. We love you. We're praying for, hoping for the best for you. Let's put our heads together. Let's figure out how to change this thing, because I don't think, as we finish out this podcast, I'll finish it this way. I don't think the Multisite Mega Church is a failed experiment, but I think it will be. And I think we'll be ashamed of what happened if something doesn't change. Yeah. But I'm excited to see what could change and what could happen. Hey, that's what Church Disrupted is about. Let's disrupt the church like any other industry. Yep. In a good way.
Make it better.
The Multisite Mega Church, that was a disruption. Yep. It was helpful. Now it's time to disrupt that disruption. We need another pivot. Yep. And when we do, it could be powerful. Yep. But until next time, we love you guys. We'll see you on the next episode of Church Disrupted.